Hello my dear friends, in this video I'm going to show you how you can continue with phacoemulsification safely if you have a capsular Rhexis runoff in a grade 2 nuclear sclerotic cataract. Remember, if the nucleus sclerosis is much harder, say 3 or 4, then I think it would be a better idea to convert to a small incision cataract surgery. However, in a grade 2 nuclear sclerotic cataract, it is still possible to continue with phacoemulsification safely without creating any undue stress on the tone edge so that it will not extend beyond the equator into the posterior capsule. As the Rhexis is progressing, I reach a point where the chamber becomes extremely shallow. Instead of reforming the anterior chamber, I go ahead and try to turn the Rhexis using the Utrada forceps, the result of which is that there is a runoff of the Rhexis to the periphery. Just by looking at this runoff, I know that this has extended right up to the zonules, mostly because the pupil is so well dilated. You have an 8 mm pupil, and therefore I don't think it would have stopped short of the zonules. Instead of trying a Little's maneuver, I take the Utrada forceps, make a nick on the intact capsular rim, and then I complete the capsular Rhexis from above. Now there is a point at 2 o'clock where the Rhexis has run off. This is going to be a potential weak zone. Remember that if you do cortical cleavage hydrodissection, this hydrodissection wave is going to pass between the capsule and the cortex, and this will create a hydrostatic pressure on the tone edge. Therefore, I avoid it and I perform only hydrodelineation procedure. So this hydrodelineation is done very carefully with very small aliquots of balanced salt solution. Having achieved this, I progress with phacoemulsification. The procedure itself is done with a slightly low bottle height settings. I usually keep it at about 100 centimeters. In this case, I kept it around 85 centimeters. The vacuum also is lowered to about 300 instead of my customary 400 millimeters of mercury. So using a power of 30%, I create the first crack in the endonucleus. And as I create the crack, you notice that the endonucleus slightly rotates. I take advantage of that, and then I create another crack to create a small segmental piece which I emulsify. At this point in time, the fluid flowing from the aspiration flow rate is going to dissect through the planes, and this generally frees out the endonucleus. So you can see that I just lift the endonucleus and the entire nucleus management has happened without even an iota of stress being transmitted to the tone capsular edge. There are no torque or stretch forces or hydrostatic forces acting at the capsular Rhexis edge. This is because you have hydrodelineated the endonucleus and simply picked it up from within the capsular bag. Then you try to attempt to remove as much epinucleus as it is feasible and possible. This epinucleus is not going to rotate because I did not do cortical cleavage hydrodissection. So I attempt a mechanical cleavage using my Sinskey hook. Pass the Sinskey hook under the capsular Rhexis edge and then over the epinucleus, and I try to mechanically cleave it and bring it to the center. In such a way, I am able to achieve a small percentage of epinucleus dislocation into the central portion, which is removed. But be careful at this point that while you attempt this mechanical separation, you do not apply too much force either in a radial fashion or in a posterior fashion. So you don't want to stretch the capsular bag or the zonules in any way. This is done very gently by passing it just over the plane of the epinucleus and trying to dig it into the center. If you find that this is not working, just give it up. You can use the Coaxial IA cannula to remove this epinucleus bit that is still remaining in the subincisional area. So using the Coaxial IA, I go and remove this epinucleus bit. So the cortex is then removed quite easily. And after removal of all the cortex, I still find that this tone edge of the capsular Rhexis has reached the equator like I correctly deduced, but it has not extended into the posterior capsule. So the next part is the implantation of the intraocular lens. So this is a hydrophobic acrylic intraocular lens, and this is inserted to be at right angles to the angle of tear. So you have to orient the haptics at right angles to the angle of tear. Since the Rhexis runoff is around 2 o'clock position, the haptics are oriented at 5 and 11 o'clock position. The viscoelastic is removed from behind the intraocular lens. However, I don't attempt to rotate the intraocular lens because I don't want the haptic sweep to get caught at the tone edge, and this can sometimes compromise the capsular Rhexis edge and make it run into the posterior capsule. However, after removing all the viscoelastic from behind the intraocular lens, I then evacuate it from the anterior chamber. The case is successfully completed without having encountered any untoward effects. I thank you for your attention.